We did a program here. When I say we, once upon a time, back when we had money, we were calling ourselves Common Sense Alliance, and we did a program here in 1999. I was going to ask somebody, apparently I have a YouTube channel. Who knew? I've got about 4 things up on YouTube. I guess that makes a channel. I can't tell you how to get to my channel, but if you go to entrancesolution.com in about a week, all the links will be up so you can watch that previous program that we did. And that was all about rail. John Caldera came up from Denver and spoke. And we had a gentleman by the name of Wendell Cox who came in and spoke. John was, good. He said, if you think you're going to reduce, traffic volumes with a rail line, stop kidding yourself. And then Wendell got into the real nitty-gritty of what you were in for if you wanted to try to build a rail line in an area with such a low population. Anyway, I highly recommend it if you're really concerned with the public policy aspect of this. If you're only concerned with the fact that you'd really like to be able to come in and out of town without having to sit there for 30 or 40 minutes in a traffic jam, it might not be that interesting. But if you have any interest whatsoever in how rail, and again, keep in mind, these are products we're being sold. And you better believe there are people who would love to sell us a rail line between here and Glenwood Springs. That doesn't mean they're your friend or that they're telling you the truth. When you start talking about $600–700 million, people fudge a little bit. So I would recommend Wendell Cox to you. And I stayed in touch with Wendell for a considerable period of time, probably another 3 or 4 years after that. And at one point I came across a really interesting website on the DOT site, which is the, of course, Federal Department of Transportation. And they had a list of all sorts of places that had transit systems that were getting federal assistance. And they would list the population and the amount of money they were spending on transportation. And you could do the math pretty easily. And I discovered, as near as I could tell, and this is a while ago, I'm sure it's the case now, that I could only find 2 jurisdictions in the United States that were spending more per capita on mass transit than we were right here in the Valley. And the only reason for that is because, well, with San Francisco and New York, they both have extensive rail systems as part of their mass transit. Other than that, as far as a bus-based system, I think we're the prize winners. Now, interestingly enough, the feds didn't do that map because they don't even bother to keep track of jurisdictions this small. I think the smallest city on there, it was around 50,000 people. So that was a bit of an eye-opener. Anyway, I decided to do the work and figure out about what percent, with all that transit, what percent of the person trips in the valley was RAFTA providing. I came up with about 4%. So I wrote to Wendell. I said, Wendell, it looks like the local bus system is handling up to 4% of the local person trips. And he said, no, that's impossible. He said, in the United States, you never get anything more than somewhere between 0.5% and 1.5%. So I explained to him why it might be different here. We've, shipped all of our workforce out of the area. It's a, single valley, single line, all that. And finally he said, well, even in Europe, where everything's built around their transit systems, you can't get much over 11% of transit, of person trips being handled by light rail or mass transit generally. So there's your range, folks, somewhere between 0.5% and 11%. There's nothing about those numbers or anything in between that will tell you that if you get the maximum diversion onto mass transit as you ever could, that it's going to have any impact on the amount of highway capacity that you need. Remember, you add additional lane, you've got a 100% increase in capacity. There's nothing else like it in all of mass transit. But you certainly can't take 10% off the road and say, oh, don't need any more highway capacity, that'll handle it. It's never been done that anybody knows of or can find. Certainly never happened in the United States. So right now they're chasing after this impossible approach to handling this. You cannot transport enough people on mass transit, and we could have another 1.5-hour seminar on why that is. I'm going to try to avoid going there. The first attempt to do an EIS for the full length between Basalt and Aspen, as I said, was carried out under the Department of Highways. Those guys were good. I mean, they knew how to get this stuff done, get it moving, and get highways built. And when they said, oh, sorry, we're going to have to bring in an expert on mass transit, they kind of shrugged and said, well, all right, we'll do that. They left behind a few presents for us. You know, something we could look at and say, yeah, I think I knew that all along, but thanks for mentioning it. But I'm going to back up again and see where we are up here on the big board. What we got? Oh, purpose and need, that's right. So back when they started the process and put out that first document in 1989, the purpose and need was to provide enough highway capacity and make it safe so people weren't killing themselves. After they were forced to limit the scope, so they were only doing basalt to buttermilk, they changed, I think, one word in the purpose and need. The portion from Buttermilk into town, which they now referred to as the entrance to Aspen, and that's how it was referred to in the whole EIS process, still had a lot of the same guys. I mean, you know, it's not a big state. There's only one department that handles this kind of stuff. And they were trying to now cope with the idea that they weren't even going to be able to use the same purpose and need. They'd literally call a section, not just a couple of statements, there's a whole section called purpose and need. And it ranges off in all directions. It's nothing at all like the very succinct statements made in the two other documents. But they did their best, and they worked their way through it, and they put out something. And by the way, when they put out that draft, and it looked like they were a few weeks away from being able to put out the final, they were pretty darn proud of themselves. They had two major issues. One was air quality. At the time, Aspen was a non-attainment area for PM10 pollution. And the second thing was they got this weird requirement that they've got to have a vote on the use of the open space. I don't think any of them had ever been through a public vote for a highway. That's not how it's done, you know. Well, the PM10 problem went away when a local department head, who was one of my all-time favorite heroes, looked at the problem of there being too much pollution in the air, completely redid the street sanding program, moved to harder material. They'd just been throwing dirt on the road for 50 years. Went to a harder gravel, went to much, much more regular street sweeping. You'll even see that today. I mean, you'll see street sweepers in this town more often than you do snowplows. And Aspen's no longer a non-attainment area. It was a simple physical problem. They applied simple physical solutions and got the air quality back in shape, at least as far as PM10, which was a bad one. It's particulates. Your lungs don't like that. So everybody's just as happy they did it, but they just applied themselves to the problem and solved it. Meanwhile, when they put their plan before the voters, after seeing all these stories about, oh, they can't make up their mind, and they got 67% of the people going, yeah, we want you guys to build us a highway, and yeah, we like your idea of putting it through the rural property, they were feeling pretty darn good about themselves, and they had every reason to. So I heard some, you know, they do all of their intake through public hearings, written comment. They've got a whole process that's built into the EIS process for finding out community input. They're not even allowed to run elections because everybody knows to the extent to which you can manipulate those. So again, the only reason there was ever an election, they would never have done it on their own, was the fact of, in order to move forward, the feds say you got to follow local law, and local law says you have to vote on the change of open space. So they were in very unfamiliar territory with all of that. And when they got that vote, ta-da! One of the longest EIS processes that anybody knew of in Colorado, at least, was about to come to a very fruitful close. So you can imagine they were not thrilled when the politicians got involved and said, no, we're just going to do basalt to buttermilk, and you guys are going to do a new process from there into town. They said, we just went through that process. Our recommendation was based on all the things you're supposed to take into account. What are we supposed to do this time around? I don't know, you'll think of something. But literally, they'd already finished it for the whole alignment. They're kind of going, okay, now what? Well, one of the things they did is did away with the purpose and need statement, expanded it to a whole section, clouded the water so badly, who knows what it means or what it's supposed to do. And at some point, the city came along and inserted their own list of project objectives. So now, instead of purpose and need, we've got project objectives. So there's another thing you can ask that federal judge. Really? Can you do that? It's all the same, all the same project. It had a purpose and need. Are we no longer going to fulfill the purpose and need? Or are we supposed to do that while we're now, accommodating all these, what did I just call them a second ago? And there's no answer to that either until you go ask a federal judge. I don't know who wants to do that. So here we are, we're trucking along on the new process. And we don't have a purpose and need statement anymore. We've got a purpose and need section. And that's what these are up here. And again, if you want to come back to Entrance Solution in about a week, there will be readable copies, and you can go through the whole thing. But they left us two gifts. Right there, they wrote into the basalt to buttermilk the need for 4 lanes. And they talk about the fact that you cannot divert enough traffic or person trips. That's the other thing. We had always talked about vehicles before. So one of the big innovations now is they switch from vehicle trips to person trips. And now we've got them, because if you run a train, you can potentially do a lot of person trips because you have all those seats. Doesn't mean you can fill the seats, but boy, you got all those seats. So they went ahead and they said, okay, we hired an outside consultant on this one because we didn't know what we were doing. And they basically told us that you can't get much above 11% in terms of diverted ridership or diverted person trips. 11%, said I. That's what Wendell Cox just told me a few months ago. So everybody who follows this stuff and looks at the actual statistics knows how many people will gladly give up their vehicle, at least for a trip or a couple of trips, and go ride on mass transit, and particularly light rail. And it's not enough to reduce the amount of capacity you need in your lanes to have the vehicle traffic move in such a way that you don't have huge traffic backups. So they wrote that into their final EIS before they put out their own record of decision for building the highway from Basalt all the way to Buttermilk. Well, they put that nice little note in there saying, well, you can't really do this because you're not going to improve traffic, the movement of traffic. You're not going to improve traffic congestion. And therefore, it's not going to solve project purpose and need. The court didn't take that up. They didn't say, well, can you proceed if you don't fulfill the original project and purpose and need? So we still don't have a federal judge that's answered that question for us. But the federal judge did say that in case of bus lanes, you absolutely do have to have an additional vote, because that's not what you asked the voters back when you got their approval to use open space. So under those circumstances, we do know that a federal judge, which means a lot to the state, thinks she had to get that approved. Well, they took it to the voters and they got it approved. And here's the fun part. They just went ahead and administratively changed the right-of-way agreement. The one where they had built in the idea that you had to have light rail. Well, now they just did it as a phasing thing. Well, we're initially going to have bus lanes, and later we'll put in the light rail. So just like that, the controlling document for all of this was changed to accommodate the bus lanes. The court said that's fine. The state went ahead and accepted it. If they hadn't, I guess they would have, I guess the city would have given their 33 acres back. I don't know what would happen under those circumstances. But we did find out one question by asking a federal judge, and that came out of the Friends of Merle Park lawsuit. So we keep trucking along on this, and we're getting nowhere. Nothing's happening. They build 2 additional lanes. They put buses on them. It does absolute squat for the traffic congestion because you're still narrowing 2 lanes down into 1 for general traffic, and you don't have sufficient lane capacity. So that 52-year experiment took another step forward and failed just as badly as it had for the previous 45 years. And we still have a mess, even though we have bus lanes. Didn't do a thing for the traffic. So now they're back there and they're going to do this again. They're going to ask people to put bus lanes through the Merle property and not expand the capacity for general traffic. And everybody knows, oh, you're going to use the Merle property, but you're not going to fix the traffic jam? Let's not do that. and it's going to get shot down as sure as hell. I mean, I'm not very good at crystal balls, but I just don't see any way that the local public, after all they've been through, is going to essentially accept, because the only leverage the local people have anymore is not to vote for anything until they come up with something that will actually relieve the traffic jam. As long as you keep saying no, maybe someday you'll get 3 reasonable people in there that'll give you an option you might want to support, which will actually relieve the traffic jam. But because HOV lanes, well, the other thing that's important in the Friends of Meralt suit, the court pointed out, one, that was a fully evaluated option, bus lanes. Not only that, at one time, it was the preferred option. Well, look what they did down here. We have a fatal flaw analysis, which then leads to comparative screening. And you have all sorts of attributes here: alignment, laneage, profile, and mode. And what they did is they go along, you see the little arrows proceeding to the right, and you see a line that's much fatter than the rest, and on the other side of that line it says stop. Well, under alignment, no arrow makes it past the black line other than modified direct. Well, that was that illustration you've been looking at most of the evening, the one on the right where you just go through the Meralt property. That's the modified direct. Laneage, 2 highway lanes plus 2 dedicated vehicle and or transit lanes. Well, hell, that sounds like a victory for the bus lane and train people, doesn't it? Except for one thing. Down below, they describe what modes they're talking about for your transit lanes. And the modes that are acceptable are guided busway. No, the guided busway isn't. That's a stop. Lo and behold, an HOV is an acceptable transit lane. And it's been fully evaluated as satisfied. Self-propelled buses, okay. Electric trolley buses, okay. Light rail. Let me explain that top thing where it says HOV. That's a description of the exact highway configuration we have between Basalt and Buttermilk. So under the record of decision for the entrance to town, the local elected officials are relying on as the proof positive that they got to have either bus lanes or light rail, says right there, you could just continue the existing highway configuration of 2-lane plus HOV lanes, 3 hours in the morning on the way up, 3 hours on the afternoon on the way down. Take that through the Meralt property and connect it directly to the 7th Street, and it's already approved. It's already a fully evaluated option under the entrance to Aspen, the latest and greatest record of decision. And if anybody wants to go ask a federal judge to reconsider that, good luck, because you're going to have to get around the other judge who already decided it in the Friends of Meralt case. You're going to have to overcome what is obvious 3-dimensional reality, which is this ain't working. So this is why it could, because whether or not this is doable has nothing to do with the federal process. The EIS is happy with HOV lanes all the way between Basalt and 7th Street. And they've said so. It's all controlled by that right-of-way agreement, which quite frankly, I don't know why the state ever agreed to that right-of-way agreement, which limits what they can do with the property they just traded for, but they did. So you could have a member of staff rewrite that thing, just like they did when they got approval for the bus lanes, only this time, you don't have to go to the voters. Your elected officials can just go ahead and do it. Why? Because of that 1990 vote. The 67% who said, yes, we want a 4-lane highway, and yes, we want it through the Meralt property. Because the stipulations in that match point for mostly what everything has already been done. It asked for replacement property for everything that was taken. That's already occurred. That's why it occurred, is because of that vote. That's the reason they went ahead with the land exchange. There is nothing in the approval from 1990 that takes the highway all the way into town that relates to any objections that the judge had in the Friends ruled. Because what they did was put together a right-of-way agreement for not only something that doesn't solve the traffic jam, so it's never satisfied the original purpose and need. At some point, I keep expecting the feds to come in and say, can we have our $200 million back? This is not what we signed up for. It's amazing how simple it is. It really is. If you know what to look for, there's nothing complicated here. It was like the time we got Wendell Cox to please do an analysis of the corridor investment study. This was preliminary to do a rail line all the way down Valley. You got back and just use their own graphs. What do you mean? Well, there's a level of service for the different sections of the highway. And he said, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, the build, the no build, rail, buses, bus lanes, none of them show any improvement in the level of service in any of those sectors. And he was right. Their own document showed that if they did any of these things, it wasn't going to help. It wasn't going to relieve congestion. And I find that a lot. If you actually just read this, there's nothing more subversive than reading one of these documents when they're all done with them. Because invariably, they don't say what the administrators and the elected officials claim they say. And this is a classic situation here. Nobody wants to mention that, yeah, you could just go ahead and extend the existing highway in the configuration it's in, all the way to 7th Street, relieve the traffic jam. You wouldn't have any bus lanes anymore, of course, like we all know, if you have bus lanes, then you don't have enough general traffic capacity to eliminate the traffic jam, or at least significantly reduce it. So that's how complicated it really and truly is if you want to fix this mess. Michael, could we have another set of slides? I don't even remember where we're going with it. Oh, my favorite. Remember I talked about we didn't have a purpose and need anymore. We had project objectives. So I keep tapping my mic. I've got to stop doing that. This is a policy statement by a city council. It has no force or effect legally anywhere. Any subsequent council could either change this, continue to enforce it, or throw it out entirely. It has no business being in a record of decision. It certainly has no business being anywhere else because it has no force or effect. And they do that on purpose. They don't want the next council to come in and come up with a new list. Well, I've got to do the whole process over again. No, that's not what they're into. But they mention in numerous places that the solution must address all these points. Well, of course it does. I've got a volume 2 down here. Let me find volume 2. It's a lot of fun. Oh, here's a volume 2. See this? That's all the comments they received during the course of the EIS. And they have addressed every one of them. In a lot of places, well, not every one. I think there's a few places where they missed. But typically, if there's a number of letters that are concerned with the same problem, but they've all been addressed. So the city keeps saying, well, they've got to address all these points. Okay, they did. I can pull it out for you and read every comment they made on each one of these points. They don't have to abide by it. They don't have to build to it. But there it is in the record of decision as though it were real. You can go to the State of Colorado website and download the same list. What's fun is when you do download it, you find out the name of the file. State of Colorado has posted these same list of project objectives, and the title for that file is City Insert. So no, it's got nothing to do with anything. Any subsequent council that wants to ignore these can. Some of these actually make me mad. They had supposedly decided they were going to hold traffic volumes in Aspen, Colorado to no more than how many vehicles were entering and leaving town in 1994. Does anybody here hate traffic? They're laughing at me. You don't hate traffic? You loved it. She hates traffic. Okay. You realize you're engaging in self-loathing? Ma'am, you are traffic. Every time you leave your house to do something you need to do or go someplace you'd like to go, you're traffic. What you really hate is traffic congestion. And they've been, I mean, not just this jurisdiction, People all over the country have been jerking us around for decades over that difference. You don't hate traffic unless you like the idea of government, every time they say we're going to reduce or control traffic, are telling you they're going to limit your choices on where you can go and how often you can go there. That's what it means to limit traffic. Most people would like to be able to go where they want to go, and they think that government is there to provide the means to do that. But they're going to hold traffic to 1994 levels. And my original reaction was, the hell you are. You can't tell me where I can go when I want to go there. And I don't want to live in a country where we think the government has that right. So that one actually pisses me off. Sorry, I just ruined my own video. Anyway, these things are ridiculous, and they have done everything they can to make it look like this is a legal document. You can find it in the record decision. You can find it on the Colorado CDOT site. Any elected officials who don't want to operate under this don't have to. Now, if you go through and you look at all the responses, some of them are so generic, it's almost laughable. We're going to have a safe and efficient highway. Well, yeah, the state will go along with that. The fact the state went along with this hold traffic volumes to 1994, it's like they knew it was meaningless. Why pick a fight? So they wrote in there, well, yes, but this would mean that the new highway is expected to operate under congestion. I want to say no S, Sherlock, but again, I'll ruin my video. So the state took it, and they fulfilled their responsibility to address these, and they did by pointing out the obvious, that this, again, won't satisfy project purpose and need, assuming there's still any need to do that, and we don't know that unless we want to go out and ask a federal judge. I would much prefer to have 3 city council members who would just say, we're tired of this. We can move forward with the same highway we have coming from Buttermilk to Basalt. So we're just going to make that decision. Just like the people back in 1970 did when they said, we're pulling the plug on the highway. They didn't vote, they didn't ask anybody. They told everybody that they didn't want the highway. As soon as they got in there, they got rid of it. And I already said, I see nothing to suggest that's going to happen this time around. I don't see 3 votes on there to do anything. They all want to study it some more. 52 years hasn't been enough. All this garbage down here. And keep in mind, this is what I personally collected. All this down here represents, maybe 5% of all the garbage that's been produced by all the consultants and all the staff people over all these years, rather than to just do the obvious. Once again, can't do the obvious because, well, I don't know, that's obvious. Now, I'm going to get on to Wagner versus City of Aspen. This was about the petition drive that we did. And petitions can only be for legislative subjects. They can't be for administrative subjects. Well, there's a big difference between the standards and how there used to be a big difference in the standards and how they're applied on a statewide issue as on a local issue. Because on a statewide issue, everything you do legislatively needs to affect everybody in the state more or less equally, across the board impact or application. Now, obviously in a local setting, that's not possible. That would be like saying if you wanted, now the city can put whatever they want on the ballot. So they can put a question on the ballot, do you want to use open space for, and then put a whole long list of design standards or attributes that they want to enforce. Now, like I said before, I don't know why the state of Colorado ever accepted that. All those limitations on the land that they were about to trade for. Again, I think a federal judge would go, well, you can't have the public designing highways. They said they wanted to transfer the property. That's all you need to do. Go ahead and build the highway you want to build. The change in use is indeed administrative in character. Get this. Reconfiguring lanes. Accordingly, we do not agree with the petitioner's assertion that the legislative amendment test applies to their proposals, and even if we were to apply the test, initiatives would fail. So you can't run an initiative. You can't go around and get signatures so people can vote on this, because it has to be handled by your elected officials and their staff because it's administrative. So can you imagine going to a federal judge and saying, our elected officials can't choose amongst the options that have already been approved by the electorate. It's got to be voted on again. So it's going, well, if you already have 3 approvals to use the open space, we have the original one, the one with the bus lanes, and then that 1996 thing that had so many contingencies in it, I don't know how it ever led to a record of decision, because that seems to be in complete violation of the EIS process. I don't think a judge is going to do that. I think he's going to say, yeah, well, it's been fully evaluated. That's what you said you wanted all along. It's the preferred alternative, has been for 23 years. Yeah, I think your elected officials can make that decision. You got 3 approvals from the people. They are completely incompatible, mutually exclusive. And in that circumstance, the appropriate thing is to have your elected officials choose from among the 3. That's why I don't believe they mean it when they say, oh yeah, we got to get this, bus lane thing going and 2 lanes and eventually be phased into light rail. No, they want to get it voted down so they can keep it the way it is. It's that same 25% that has wanted nothing all along. Anyway, I love thinking about 52 years of history, all of that, all these meaningless votes. Like I said, there's only been 2 that meant anything. All this drama, all this kerfuffle. The Court of Appeals comes along and says, oh, you guys are just reconfiguring lanes. Kind of puts things into perspective, doesn't it? We've been fighting all this time over reconfiguring lanes, which, by the way, is what your elected officials are supposed to be doing. That's what they're charged to do. If you want to come up and look at all this stuff, it is hilarious. I mean, the fact you can generate all of this, and like I said, it can't even be 5% of the garbage that's been generated over all these years. That has nothing to do with the original problem. It's every tangent you can think of that every transportation consultant could devise, because the people who wanted nothing to happen love that.
We recorded this on February 15th in the Wheeler Opera House, and there was a municipal election in Aspen on March 7th, 3 weeks later. Everybody was a bit surprised to learn that I wasn't doing it for that upcoming election. It was a timing, I don't know if coincidence is quite right, but I was really looking at a longer term in terms of the value of putting this together. We went ahead and rushed a version onto YouTube because I was sort of curious to see if any of the candidates for office on March 7th would take the opportunity to comment on what we had done. It would have been pretty quick. They would have had to make up their mind in, 24 hours or so. So no, that did not happen. And there was nothing about any of the people who ended up on this council that made me think that we have much to work with in terms of enlisting their aid in finally resolving this issue. So I've very much been focused on the next election, which will be in March of 25. For one thing, Tory will be term limited out. It will be a true open seat. No incumbent that you have to beat. So this is really intended going forward to be first and foremost a recruitment tool. And I'm calling on everybody in this valley and the 2 neighboring valleys to put their thinking caps on. Think about everybody you know who lives in Aspen, Colorado. Think about whether they have a little bit of administrative or management experience or just are good public speakers, whatever. But most of all, people who can follow this entire video, get to the end and say, that makes perfect sense. Let's do that. So that's our first task, really, is to find people for that upcoming election in a little less than 2 years. I know that sounds like a long time. Keep in mind, I started in 1984 on this particular issue. So to me, it just sounds like the right amount of time to get the planning done. Get people in place. If we got that done in the next 3 or 4 months, that'd be fine. Those same people who want to run could show up at all these upcoming meetings, which I assume are going to happen, because the city keeps claiming they want to do another election. Now, one of the questions that'll come up, particularly for anybody who chooses to run for office, is why aren't they going to have an election and have the people vote on this one more time? And the simple answer is, it doesn't do anything. That's not what this is about. The election was just to approve the use of open space. It doesn't have anything to do with federal or state requirements for building a highway. And in fact, The federal and state government doesn't use elections to determine what to do about a highway. The brand new bridge over the Colorado River didn't require any votes of the people. And oh, by the way, that is Highway 82. So the whole point here is to try to get things back into their normal lanes, if you'll excuse the pun, which is that the elected officials can use whatever method they want to determine what you, the public, wants to see happen. But ultimately, the decision and the action has to be taken by the elected officials. So let's start with the part that matters and get elected officials in there who understand the whole situation, start to finish, will claim that what they want to do is exactly what you will be seeing on this video. And in that respect, it's going to be a bit of a guidebook, a step-by-step. This is how you get an entrance built that will greatly, dramatically reduce the traffic congestion in the entrance to town.